The tank's role at the start of the war was to close with and destroy the enemy through maneuver, shock, and firepower. This is basically what tanks do. But the terrain in the north, up near Kyiv, is very conducive to anti-armor ambushes. This means that people can hide in a grove of trees or inside buildings and shoot at tanks using missiles. Down in the south, the story is a little bit different. The terrain looks a lot more like Kansas. This is very conducive to tank warfare, but the problem is that the Russians just can't seem to exploit a breakthrough along the front. And so the tanks are hanging back right now, looking for an opportunity to exploit a breakthrough while the Russians pound Ukrainian lines with artillery. Yes, it's true, but old and new are kind of subjective. Russia's main battle tank, its workhorse battle tank, is the T-72. This is a 50-year-old tank design, but it's gone through a number of upgrades. The most recent version is the T-72B3M. Russia operates three main classes of tanks: the T-72, the T-80, and the T-90. So while the T-80 and T-90 were technically created after the T-72, a T-72 with a modern B3M update from 2017 might actually be better than a more modern T-90. There has been footage of Russians moving old T-62 tanks by rail. We really don't know why they're doing that. Maybe they're sending them to the front, but those tanks use a main gun that's a different caliber than the T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s that Russia uses. So they might be being sent to arm a reserve force, or they might be sent to Syria because maybe Syria bought a couple, or they might be being sent to help train reservists before they fall in on more modern equipment. We really don't know the answer to that. Western tanks are pretty effective, and this mainly comes down to lethality and survivability. Western tanks use a lot of different kinds of technology to find the enemy tank and destroy the enemy tank. And Western tanks center around survivability. The West tends to believe that the tank crew is more important than the physical tank. You can always get the crew a new tank, but it takes a very long time to get a crew very well trained on how to operate that tank and work as a team. So Western tanks do tend to be more effective, but the real difference is funding. The West has money to allow for the special kinds of training that make a tank crew gel and perform as a very cohesive unit. Ukraine primarily operates the T-64 and the T-80, and that's because the factory that made those tanks just happened to be in Ukraine when the Soviet Union collapsed. Ukraine also operates a number of captured Russian T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s. As for whether they're good tanks, the T-64 is about a 60-year-old design, but Ukraine has upgraded it quite extensively. The T-80 is also a good tank. Russia and Ukraine are roughly at parity when it comes to tanks, just the vehicles in general. Really, it comes down to which crew is better trained, which crew has more experience. And in this case, Russia and Ukraine have been fighting for almost 4 months now, and both of them have significant experience in tank warfare, so nobody really has an advantage. If you're just looking at raw vehicles, Ukrainian advisor to the president, Mikhailo Podolyak, had said that Ukraine will need about 500 main battle tanks and 2,000 other kinds of armored vehicles in order to turn the tide of the war.